that we have Kathy Carruthers. I've pulled a favor, longtime friend and colleague, and we've been involved in many projects together and served on the board of the International Lactation Consultant Association Board of Directors. So I have had the pleasure of working with Kathy for quite some time, and I'm just thrilled that she's agreed to share her great wisdom and experience with us today. So I'll turn it over to you, Kathy.
Thanks so much, Becky, and welcome all of you. Thanks to Ingrid to help facilitate this, and to the Oklahoma Breastfeeding Resource Center for really all you're doing to help hospitals in their baby-friendly journey. You know, this is really gratifying for me personally because Oklahoma is my home as well. It's not my current home. I currently live in Mississippi with my husband and my family, but I grew up in Tulsa, and my parents and many of my 11 younger brothers and sisters all still live in various cities throughout the state. So I'm very excited to get to share with y'all as what I consider to be family. Before I begin, I did want to give you my one disclosure for this talk, and that is the slides I'm presenting come from a baby-friendly platform of slides that I created through a contract with Cofective.com, and I'm going to be using those slides today with permission from Cofective. I should probably also disclose that the counseling approaches that I'm going to be sharing today have been used in the realm of breastfeeding support actually for many years. So you're all going to hear some things and think, yeah, I remember learning about that. I remember hearing about that. It's just sometimes we need to be reminded about some of the principles that it's easy to overlook when we get busy in the hospital. I've actually been doing counseling workshops in hospitals and communities and in WIC agencies in every U.S. state now for the past 20 years or so of my career. And I do really want to attribute that much of what I have learned about counseling stems from the Leche League, which pioneered, I think, some of the original counseling approaches and active listening skills that we still use in the breastfeeding field today. The three-step counseling strategy, which is a counseling approach that was adopted by the WIC program in 2003, really builds on those early efforts of the Leche League, and it really shows us those simple steps to building a relationship with a mom and really opening that conversation in a way that will build rapport and help her to hear the information that we have for her. So I'm going to really be going back to the three-step strategy in this talk and relying heavily on that wonderful foundation of the Leche League. So with that in mind, I want to just remind us that as hospital staff and lactation consultants and educators, we know a lot. You all know a lot. We've earned our credentials through expanding our knowledge and continuing to grow our learning. But how to communicate that wonderful knowledge to families can sometimes be a challenge. And I want to just remind you all that new mothers have very special learning needs. In fact, research tells us that in that very vulnerable postpartum period, women tend to be right-brain thinkers. And what that means is they develop that wonderful postpartum amnesia that we've all seen. They respond more out of their emotions than they do to facts. They have a hard time assimilating information. They learn better through visuals that appeal to that right brain, and they live for messages that are going to calm them and reassure them and just help them to feel like they can address their barriers and their vulnerabilities and their fears. So that means that our counseling needs to keep in mind these very unique learning needs of new mothers. So I want to begin this discussion really by talking about feelings, because after all, right-brain thinkers are all about their feelings. This is a picture of a peer counselor and her child. This young lady lives, I believe, in Texas. That's where this lady lives. And I love it because it reminds me of some of my experiences nursing my own children and seeing them pick up and adopt the behaviors that I was doing as we normalized breastfeeding in our family. For me personally, when I think about the very first time that I ever saw a mother breastfeed, I think of a situation like this because I remember seeing my own mother breastfeed my little brothers and sisters and how she normalized that for us. But I also realized that this has not been the experience for a lot of the mothers that I serve and that you serve. And for many of the moms we serve, when they think about the first time they've ever seen breastfeeding, they might actually have some negative experiences. Maybe they were embarrassed. Maybe they were shocked or appalled. Or maybe they have never seen anybody breastfeed before, and maybe they are going to be the first person that they've ever seen do it before. So our feelings that we bring to this experience really wraps around our own personal beliefs, our culture, our subsequent experiences that we have, and the things that we encounter. They all affect our own personal feelings about breastfeeding. These feelings are not right, they're not wrong, they just are. But we should be aware that these experiences can affect the way mothers feel about breastfeeding, how they feel about the practices in our hospitals, and we should also know that we as staff also bring our own feelings to the table as well. So with that in mind, I want to just remind us that the mothers and families we serve have very, very unique feelings. Many of them have experiences, maybe previous experiences with a hospital in another realm. It might be from another baby that they've given birth at. It might be that they were in the hospital or family was in the hospital for some kind of an illness or some kind of a tragedy. So they bring lots of those experiences. And they also bring their cultural experiences and the beliefs of the community that they live in, things that their family have told them. What they've learned before the birth of the baby also is going to impact what they feel about breastfeeding, the things that they learned about during their pregnancy. And that's why, of course, prenatal preparation is so important and a crucial tenet of the 10 steps to successful breastfeeding. So our counseling skills really need to tune into these feelings so that we can learn to listen and maybe a little bit better understand some of the things that moms might be feeling. Let's talk for a moment about recognizing some of our own feelings, because I think as healthcare professionals, many of us have entered this field because we care very deeply about making a difference in someone's life, and I think mothers pick up on that. When we're really bringing that passion and that true, sincere desire to make a difference in somebody's life, the people that we're working with know that. They can see that in our eyes and our touch and the way we communicate with them. But, sometimes we bring other feelings to the table, too. Sometimes we bring feelings of frustration. Maybe we're frustrated over the limited time to do everything we want to do for all of our patients, or feeling like we have to juggle so many demands with so little time. Some staff report that they're frustrated, that they're not able to implement the kind of support that they really want to because the mothers aren't prepared, or maybe there's certain policies in the hospital or the physician or other people in authority take precedence over the things we feel are important. Sometimes staff tell us that they're just flat out exhausted. They've worked very long hours, maybe very few breaks, and that takes a toll on our ability to really be able to tune into a mother and to set that aside sometimes. Sometimes staff tell us that they bring feelings of fear. Maybe they're being asked to provide care that they aren't really fully equipped to take on. For example, maybe couplet care is something that your hospital is planning to take on, and nurses are feeling a little bit frustrated or a little bit afraid of, gosh, now I've got to be responsible for 2 patients in that dyad, or I'm not really sure about how to handle the baby. I just feel more comfortable working with the mom. So there can be some issues there. Sometimes staff tell us that they really bring some anger and maybe some resentment, that maybe their concerns are not heard, or that when they talk to families really excitedly about these new policies and new practices, but the families don't respond the way we want them to respond, and can make us feel a little bit resentful when mothers really don't want the care that we're wanting to provide. I think the key is to remember that how we feel makes a difference, and that even though our feelings are not right or wrong, they just are, nonetheless, those feelings come to work with us every single day, and they do affect how we approach moms and how we talk about the practices that we have. So I want us to talk also about our feelings about breastfeeding, because some of our staff have very, very strong feelings about the importance of breastfeeding, and that's great. If you are a mother, perhaps you personally breastfed your own children and you had a very positive experience. That's been my case. I grew up in a family where my mother breastfed all 12 or 11 of the 12 of us in a time when nobody was breastfeeding. And that really did affect the way I feel about breastfeeding. I breastfed all 5 of my children. I had a very, very positive experience with all 5 of my children. I always tell people that I wish I had known with number 1 what I finally figured out with number 5. But nonetheless, I had a very positive experience, and I bring that to the table. I know that I probably come across as very passionate and very enthusiastic. Those are my feelings. But not everybody feels that way. Some people may be breastfed, but it wasn't easy for them. They had to work through a lot of challenges, and somehow they persevered through those challenges to meet their goals. Perhaps some of our staff struggled a lot with breastfeeding, and they stopped before they really wanted to because things just really weren't going well. Maybe they lacked the support or the information that we now know, and as a result, that affects the way you feel about breastfeeding. Perhaps you work with people, or you personally chose not to breastfeed your children. Maybe nobody shared information with you, or maybe you were discouraged from breastfeeding because you weren't really sure how you were going to be able to combine it with your nursing career. I think just reflecting on those experiences and those feelings can help us realize how they have informed our current beliefs and our feelings about breastfeeding. Some of our staff, and maybe you personally, have no children, or you never breastfed. You chose never to breastfeed, or you don't have any children. Again, those feelings and experiences will also affect how we feel. I think the good news to remember is that experience is not required. This is one field where it is not necessary to have personally breastfed. I think our obligation is to understand evidence-based practices, to become knowledgeable in the areas we are not really very sure about, and to support our patient and give them what they need to be able to reach the goals they have set. So I want to just clarify that baby-friendly is not about making anybody breastfeed. Baby-friendly is about really tuning in to what the mother's needs are and creating the environment that helps her to succeed in reaching those goals. And I think that's a clarification we need to keep in mind. And also to remember that we do make a difference. Each one of us makes a difference, whether you personally breastfed or not. And I sometimes tell staff that if you did not breastfeed or it didn't work out for you, that you have the greatest story to tell, because you are in a position now to say to mothers, I didn't have what we have today. When I breastfed or had my own children, we didn't have the information and support that we're going to make sure you get so that you have a different outcome. So your story, I think, can be even more powerful. So I think we can learn as much as we can about breastfeeding. We can grow in our knowledge. We can grow in ways that we can hopefully help support moms in even greater ways. I also want to just remind us that a lot of times women have this image of who the good mom is. And many times people feel that how you choose to feed your baby determines whether or not you were a good mom. And that holds true for the mothers that we're serving, but it also holds true for ourselves as staff. Sometimes people feel like if I didn't personally breastfeed or I didn't meet the recommendations of the AAP, somehow that means I wasn't a very good mother. And people can become very resentful about that. And as you're talking to patients, you may find mothers who did not breastfeed their first child or their second child, or things didn't work out, and they are holding some feelings of regret for how things turned out. So I think it's really important to remind ourselves, as well as our colleagues and the mothers that we're serving, that how you feed your baby is not the issue in terms of motherhood. That being a good mom means that we're there for our children, that we impart values to them, that we give them loving guidance, that we help them achieve their potential. Those are the keys to good parenting. And certainly how we feed our baby is important, and we want to be there for our moms to give them that information and support that they're going to need. But that isn't what determines good motherhood or not. And I think as women, we need to begin to let ourselves off the hook and give ourselves permission for the things and decisions we made that we can't go back and fix now. It is what it is, and we move on from there. I think another big issue I hear from a lot of staff is the concern that if we talk a lot about breastfeeding to moms, we're going to make them feel guilty. And I want to just remind us that our responsibility is to help families make an informed choice about their care and about the feeding decisions that they're going to make. Research actually shows that later in life, it isn't guilt that mothers feel if they chose not to breastfeed or if they chose to wean early. What women feel is often a sense of regret that they weren't given the information or the support that they needed. So when we choose not to tell mothers about the importance of breastfeeding, or we make assumptions about people that certain kinds of people won't breastfeed, African American women don't breastfeed, or teen mothers don't breastfeed, or single moms don't breastfeed, when we make those kinds of assumptions, we're basically taking people's power of choice away. We're making the decision for them. And later in life, people look back on those situations, and they can often feel sad and sometimes even angry later on, given the information to make their own choice. Now, the picture I have on the screen, I have this up here for a reason, because this is a mom that I met. This is a grandmother in Mississippi that I met several years ago. We actually featured her in one of our videos that we created here in the state. And what was so striking about this interview that we had with her, if you've not seen this video, you might want to go to the Mississippi State Department of Health and go to their breastfeeding page, and you can download that video and view it. It's a very, very powerful video. And it actually features 5 different moms talking about their experiences. But this segment is right in the middle. This is, I think, the 3rd segment in that video. And this grandmother was talking about her experiences of bottle feeding her first children. And she said in the video, "I wish someone had told me about breastfeeding." She has a very strong Southern accent. But she went on to say, "My children are healthy, but I think it would have made them even healthier. And I'm close to my children, but I think we could have been a whole lot closer. And I just wish someone had told me." But no one did. And we cut the video right there at that moment after she said that no one did. And the reason we cut it there is because she burst into tears at that point. And it took several minutes of, healing and therapy and hugging her and just letting her know that she was a good mom. She did everything she knew to do at that time. But it reminded me that we don't want any mother to ever have to look back and wish that somebody had told them. This mom has, her children are now 30, 35 years old at the time we did that video, and yet 35 years later, she still burst into tears. Those emotions were still there. So I just want to remind us that it's powerful. When we give moms the information they need to make an informed choice, they don't have those regrets because they know they made the decision that was right for them at the time. So how do we do this? How do we really begin that process? And I want to just point to the importance of listening. And this picture is a great picture because it reminds me of an English children's nursery rhyme. It's called The Wise Old Owl. It's one of my favorites. It was published back in the 1800s, but I think it's pretty relevant to us today. And this nursery rhyme goes like this. A wise old owl lived in an oak. The more he saw, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he heard. Why can't we be like that wise old bird? I think that's some great wisdom as we think about the importance of listening with our eyes and with our ears. So listening is really what helps us to find out more than what we might have known otherwise. And I want to share just a little story of something that I discovered a few months ago. I went with a couple of friends to the state of Washington to do some photography. That's one of my pastimes, and we had a great trip up there, but we were driving along the Cascade Highway, which is a very scenic drive in the state, and there's some beautiful scenes along the way. And one of the things we kept noticing was that there were lots of these little small innocuous signs that most motorists miss because everybody is in this zeal to reach Stevens Pass or these major tourist towns ahead. They're absolutely beautiful, of course. But along the way, you see these little signs, and people are just speeding past them because they aren't even noticing them. We decided to stop and see, what is this river access thing anyway? What exactly is it? So we went along, and lo and behold, this was the scene that we came upon when we parked our car. It was a very short drive of maybe not even a tenth of a mile. Got out of our car and saw this absolutely stunning vista, the amazing green water, this oasis of beauty, really, flanked by these velvet green mountains. And we spent about an hour at this spot because it was so beautiful. It turned out to be one of the most beautiful spots in the entire drive that day, and we would have missed it if we hadn't noticed that sign. So I think it's a really important reminder that sometimes we need to take the time to listen and take in what's around you, because you can miss things otherwise. So how do we do that listening? How do we really connect with people? There's really three ways that we connect with other people. We connect through our words, we connect through our tone of voice, and we connect through body language. And as you look at this three, I want you just to kind of ask yourself, of these three, which do you think might be most important? Which of these three probably communicate your message most? It turns out that body language is the most important way that we communicate. In fact, 55% of your message is communicated through your body. That's amazing when you think about it. When you think about how you are busy and on the floor, and you're communicating that I'm busy and I'm stressed, how that is communicating your message. We also know tone of voice accounts for 38% of your message, and that means that only 7% of your message is communicated through your actual words. What you communicate more to your patient is how you say those words rather than the words themselves. And that's why learning to listen is so crucial. Being curious to what you're hearing and what you're not hearing is going to help us to tune in better to what that mother needs most from us. So thinking about what makes it hard to listen, I think we need to acknowledge there are a lot of things that stand in the way in a busy hospital unit. And that can include patient demands, patients who are in pain, too many visitors in the room, all the time demands that we have on us. Sometimes our personal approaches can stand in the way of our ability to listen. And I think one of the biggest temptations we have is to give patients too much information. And that's really easy and tempting to do, because when you're busy and you have limited time, we tend to just overwhelm people with everything to try to get it all out before they leave. So I think instead of giving too much information, we really need to focus on smaller bites of information at teachable moments. So for example, let's say you are in a room and you see that a baby is showing feeding cues. Well, that's a perfect teachable moment to show the mother and the father or other family members what that feeding cue means and how they can best respond. They're going to be more likely to remember that information. I think another temptation we have often is the desire to fix our families. That's just a natural tendency, because our job at the hospital is to help people improve their health. But I think when we focus more on trying to wave that wand of magic health rather than really tuning into what our patients really want from us, we can miss some things that are going on. Another thing that can stand in the way is our own fatigue, our own stress when we're working long hours can make it harder for us to focus on what the mother needs. And sometimes we unwittingly complicate care by using words or examples that people really are not very familiar with. We say one thing, but it may be coming across in a very different way. So one of the examples I like to think about is talking about colostrum. We talk a lot about colostrum and why that's important, but you know what? Most people have no idea what colostrum is, and it's a big word, and it's a word a lot of people just think of as something that's kind of hard and complicated. So maybe instead of using that word, you might want to think about using the word your first milk, or your first milk is very concentrated, and that's something mothers can identify with. Even using a word like areola. You know, when you think about it, when we talk about bottle feeding, we use very normal, everyday words. And somehow or another, when we start talking about breastfeeding, we bring out all of our big words. And when we do, we make breastfeeding seem very, very hard. I once had a mother, I was talking to her about her areola, and she started frowning. And I asked her, what she seemed to be confused about, and she said, well, this areola thing, is that like breast cancer on my breast? And I had to explain, no, it's not a tumorous growth. It's that dark part behind your nipple. And then I thought, well, why don't you just call it what it is? It's that dark part behind your nipple. So I really have been learning from the mothers I served over the years to really keep my language simple. Instead of talking about Montgomery glands, I just call those pimply bumps because that's what mothers understand. And I don't even use the word milk duct anymore because nobody knows what a milk duct is. I once had a mother who thought I was saying D-U-C-K instead of D-U-C-T, and she was imagining she had ducts by her breasts that were quacking, I guess. So, again, I think keeping our language simple. I don't call them milk ducts anymore. I call them the milk highway system because that's really what they are. Those ducts serve as a highway system to transport milk. So again, I think just keeping our language simple and uncomplicated can really make a difference. So when we think about listening skills, I think it's really important to shut out the distractions, the physical distractions, the emotional distractions, and make a conscious effort to focus on the mother and the baby's father or her mother or whoever is in that room with her. That might include turning your cell phone off or to silent, trying not to dwell on the stresses of the day or all the other things you have to do, really focusing in on that mother. So I want to tell you just a little story about an experience that I had a couple of years ago. I had gone down to Australia to attend a conference, an ILCA conference, and I took a side trip with my husband down to Kangaroo Island, which is down on the very southernmost portion of the country near Adelaide, Australia. And off the coast of Adelaide, on this little Kangaroo Island, the very, very bottom of the island is a breeding colony of around 1,000 Australian sea lions. And they are actually endangered species and considered some of the most rare sea lions in the world. So I loved going down there and carrying my camera. That's one of my pastimes, to do some photography, and had a great time. And while we were down there looking at all these seals that were barking all around us, it's a very, very noisy area, we saw this sea lion coming in from the ocean. There were lots of sea lions coming in and out. And I had learned a little bit about sea lions, that they have a very long breeding cycle, about 18 months. So you can imagine being pregnant for 18 months. But once they give birth, they typically go out to sea after the baby is born, and they may be out to sea for 10 days or so, leaving that pup so that they can go out to forage. When they return, they use their vocal and scent communications to listen for their pup. And I wasn't really sure what was going on, but I watched this particular sea lion coming in from the ocean, and she stood there on the banks of the shore for a very long time, just staring like this. And it was kind of weird. I was watching her thinking, what is this sea lion doing? What I didn't realize is that this sea lion was a mother, and she was actually listening for her pup. Because after a few minutes of being totally paralyzed in this spot, she quickly ventured off and found her baby and began nursing. It was a wonderful, sacred moment to be able to witness that happening. Now that she's found her pup, she will actually nurse this pup for around 33 hours until it's time for her to go back out to sea again. And I thought, as I watched this story unfold right before my eyes, I thought, isn't that true? This is what we need to do as counselors. We need to learn how to tune out all of the noisy distractions, just like this mother had to tune out all the barking seals on that shore to tune in to new mothers and what they need from us most. So that means we need to be present with them, with the moms that we serve. We need to look at making eye contact if it's culturally appropriate. Be aware that sometimes mothers don't make eye contact because they're shy, or they're not really sure of what's going on, or maybe they're afraid. There can be a lot of emotions that can keep mothers from wanting to make eye contact. So don't take it personally if they don't want to make eye contact with you. But you can still show eye contact with them and show that you're taking an interest in them and wanting to stay focused, just following their lead. You also want to pay attention to her body language as well as to your body language. So when you look at this picture, you see two nurses at a hospital who are trying to help a mother latch her baby. And as I look at this picture, I can't help but look at the face of this mother. And you look at her face, she looks really overwhelmed. There are hands all over her breast and all over her baby. She is trying to latch her baby, but you can tell from her expression she is really feeling stressed at what's happening around her. So you want to think about how your body language comes across and how mothers might be perceiving that. So you might want to get at eye level with her rather than hovering over her when you're helping her. And you remember, moms who are in that bed, they're feeling very vulnerable. So when you're standing over her and you're hovering over her, can be very, very intimidating and actually very frightening to mothers. You can lean in when she's sharing something that's important that just shows that you're interested in what she's saying. If you lean in and she pulls back, that could be a signal you're too close and she's feeling threatened. So if that happens, you want to just back up a little bit. You also want to smile as much as you can. And I want to remind you, research tells us we can make up to 20,000 different facial expressions. So use those expressions in a positive way. Research shows that women rely on your face, the way you express your face, to determine whether you are accepting her and whether you are you're relating well to her. So use your face. It's very, very powerful. You can also do things like nodding to let her know that you hear her and you understand her. I want to remind you to avoid putting your hands on her breast unless you've asked permission first. Many women are very, very uncomfortable with people touching their breast, especially if they have been sexually abused. In fact, I believe the research shows that about 1 out of 4 women has been violated sexually, and they really have concerns when you just rush in and start grabbing their breast. I've had women tell me that the nurse came in and grabbed my breast, or she shoved the baby on my breast. I've had women tell me they've actually used the words violated to describe how they felt when a nurse touched their breast without their permission. So be very careful about that. Always ask permission. Listen to her body language as you proceed. I think many lactation consultants find that when we place our hand over the mother's hand, that can be much more effective because that way she is doing the touching of her own breast and we're just using our hand to kind of guide her hand, because in the end, when she leaves your hospital, she's got to be able to do this on her own. So I think putting your hand over her hand can be very helpful. But even with that, I always ask for the mother's permission to be able to do that. You want to work on identifying the mother's feelings. Because we are feeling creatures, you want to think about what do you think she might be feeling on this. Moms are also affected by community factors, things that are happening in terms of the environment around us, and overall societal norms, legislation, things along that line. So we know that research consistently shows that the impact of the grandmother, the maternal grandmother, is very, very important. So I hope you all really reach out to those grandmothers and make sure that we relate to them, we involve them, that we help them to feel a valued part of this process, because grandmothers are very, very crucial to that mother's decision. And, you know, I want to remind you that if you tell a grandmother that we know more today, that sometimes grandmothers don't respond really well to that, because what you're basically telling her is that she's too old to be relevant or useful. So you want to just let her know that that she's valued, that she's important, that the mom is really going to need her, and how happy you are that she's here to support her. Let her know that her role is crucial, that the mom is going to really need her in the days. So in thinking about the baby's father, I wanted to go back to this picture, this one that I showed earlier, showing the body language issues. But this is actually what I showed you before is only a small part of this picture, because actually when this picture was taken, there's another part that I want you to see. And this is the dad. Let me go back there. And when you see this dad and how aloof he seems in this process, I don't think we really realize how dads feel about our hospital stay. I've had many dads tell me that they feel invisible in the hospital. And actually, one recent study found that 80% of dads say the hospital experience for them as a new father was negative. And what dads tell us all the time is, nobody ever talked to me. Nobody ever speaks to me. They don't even acknowledge my presence. So I think it's really, really important as we're helping new families that we include the father or whoever that mother's important partner is, or the champion she's brought there with her, that we help them to feel part of this as a family. You know, I met a dad one time who jokingly told me, but he was serious. He said, I was there for the conception, okay? I was there. And I would like to be acknowledged for the role that I'm playing. And that really struck me, and I have never forgotten that dad and his very honest portrayal of his role in the process. So I think we want to make sure we're considering not only the barriers that the mother might be having, but the barriers that the father might be having as well, that we acknowledge those barriers and help them to see how breastfeeding can work as a family. I love to involve the dad when I'm helping the mother breastfeed to show him how we're latching this baby, because you know what? When she goes home from the hospital, he's going to be her lactation consultant at home. He will be, or her mama, whoever's going to be the important part of her family. As you're talking about barriers, you also want to remember that moms have a lot of barriers that can make all of our practices seem very hard for them. Barriers, for instance, of just having a lot of people in the room. The barriers in the first hour. Sometimes moms have barriers from a long or difficult labor. Many mothers don't understand this, and I consider that to be gross. I don't understand that it has actually healing properties to it. Sometimes there's medical complications that can stand in the way. Sometimes moms have a lot of barriers to breastfeeding. They're worried about pain, or they are not really knowledgeable about how they're going to work this into their life once they get home. So being aware of her barriers, asking her what those barriers are, can be really important. So I want to turn quickly to some the 3 steps that are important in beginning and holding an important counseling encounter with moms. And the first one I want to mention is the importance of open-ended questions. Now, this is something you all, I'm sure, are thinking, gosh, I do this. I ask open-ended questions all the time. But you know what? I have done training programs on counseling in hospitals all over the country. And there's a little activity we do with a little role play in the training that I do. And what I learned every single time, people say, wow, I thought I was asking a lot of open-ended questions, but I'm really not. You know, when you get busy, the natural instinct is to fall back on your scripting messages and to fall back on the things that are part of our personal agenda. But you should know that when we don't ask open-ended questions, that mothers feel that they're being interrogated. People don't give you the answers that are correct all the time. Sometimes people tell you what they feel comfortable saying or what they think you want to hear rather than what's really going on. So our key is to create a safe space where people feel they can share what's really going on. So just like in this picture, you see this baby is in a wonderful safe space. We need to create that kind of safe space for our mothers, and our open questions are what help us to do that. So it's sort of like fishing with a fishing pole. If you were to go out on the edge of a lake and go fishing with a single fishing pole, you will only get one fish at a time, usually. But if you were to throw out a net instead of that fishing pole, you would be able to get a huge haul of a whole lot of fish that you'll be able to sort through. And sort of in the same way, our closed questions are like that fishing pole. You're only going to get one little piece of information at a time. But our open questions are like throwing out the net. It's creating that safe space so that people feel that they can be heard. Now, I realize as busy staff, you cannot ask every single question in an open way, and that's okay. But at least begin your conversations with some open questions and use them as much as you possibly can to help people feel safe being able to share their concerns. So the open questions have no right or wrong answer. They just are. They just allow them to share what's really going on. So one of the ways, the little tricks that I use to help me remember to ask things in an open way is to begin my questions with one of these three: what, how, or tell me. I'm on my computer at home, and I have it there all the time because it's a reminder to me visually that if I'll ask my question with one of these words, it's probably going to be open. So it might sound like this. You might say something like, what options have you already tried? How does your family feel about breastfeeding? What are your thoughts about rooming in? What have you heard about rooming in? Tell me what you would like to do in the first hour. Tell me what's important to you. Tell me what worries you about leaving the hospital. Or maybe even something like, tell me who's going to be around to support you once you go home. Now, one of the questions that I hear in every hospital, every staff person, every WIC agency, every community group, every single person I ever talk to tends to begin the conversation about breastfeeding like this. Are you going to breastfeed or bottle feed? Or are you breastfeeding or bottle feeding? And I just want to remind you that that is a difficult question and a difficult way to begin a counseling encounter, because you're forcing a person to make a decision before they have been able to get any information to make an informed decision. You're asking her to commit before you've even given her any information. And it presents these two feeding practices as equal options. And the other issue is that it shuts down communication. Because if she says, I'm going to bottle feed or I'm going to formula feed, then you now have to come back and tell her that her answer was wrong by giving her information about why breastfeeding is better. And people shut down when you inadvertently tell them that they're wrong. So instead of beginning your conversations this way, we really recommend beginning with this question. This is probably the very best way to begin the conversation about breastfeeding. And that is, what have you heard about breastfeeding? Now, this doesn't say how do you feel about breastfeeding, because you know what? She might not trust you enough to tell you what she's feeling. And we aren't asking her, what do you know about breastfeeding? I once asked the mother, what do you know about breastfeeding? And she got all flustered and finally said, I didn't know I was coming to school today. I don't know anything about breastfeeding. And she really shut down. And I realized that was not a good way to begin. So when you ask, what have you heard? You're just asking, what are other people telling you? What have you heard on television? What have you heard in the things that you've read? And that's a really important question, because here's the truth. What she's heard is what she's thinking about. It's what she's worried about. So it's an incredibly powerful way to quickly get at what she's worried about most. And from there, you can begin to provide her information that's specific to the things she's most worried about. Now, the second step in the three-step counseling practice is to affirm the mother's feelings. So step one is open-ended questions. Step two is to affirm. Now, it's really tempting once you've heard just a little bit of information to rush in and give her some more. But you know what? Mothers aren't always ready to hear that information until they're sure until they're sure first that they've been heard and that their feelings matter. And that's why affirmation is your power tool, because affirmation lets her know her feelings are okay. And when you tell a mother that her feelings are okay, it helps her to relax. It releases endorphins, and those endorphins really open up her brain, the cerebral cortex, the part of her brain that hears and processes information. And that, in turn, also helps to build trust, because oxytocin is released when a mother is affirmed. So it's a very powerful way to help her hear the information. You know, if your brain isn't relaxed, you can't hear or assimilate information. So you can affirm the mother as much as you possibly want, because it is very, very powerful. So your affirmation is sandwiched between open-ended questions and step three, which is education. And it's very powerful when you link it to her emotions or what you think she might be feeling. There are actually several ways to affirm that mom. These are 5 ways that I have found are probably the easiest ones and probably the most commonly used ones that are very, very powerful. And the first way to affirm is to agree with her. If you can. I understand you can't agree with everything you hear, but when you can affirm by agreeing, it's very powerful because that lets her know she's pretty smart. She's figured something out. So you could say something like, you're right. Babies do seem to want to feed a lot right at first. So you're letting her know what you're feeling is perfectly normal and that it's that you agree with her. A second way to affirm her is to tell her she isn't alone. And if you can say that you've been through that experience as well or you have felt that way, that's even more powerful. So you might say something like, I've met a lot of mothers who have gone through that same experience. Or you might say, I remember feeling that way too. That's very powerful. Now, I will remind you, mothers really don't want to hear your birth story. They don't care about your birth story. But just that simple statement, I remember feeling that way, is really powerful. And it helps you and that mother to build a rapport and a connection that she. A third way to herself, what's her biggest concern? What is it she's really worried about? And then you can affirm those feelings. So you might say something like, it looks to me like you're really feeling exhausted right now. So again, you're reading between the lines. She might say, take this baby to the nursery. Yes, she wants the baby to the nursery, but read between the lines. What is it she's really feeling? And when you go with the feelings, you won't go wrong because then she'll begin to relax and you can begin to educate her more appropriately. Another way to affirm her is to shine the spotlight. Find something she's doing well. Anything. Sometimes moms are telling you, my breast hurts and my nipples are bleeding, and you say something like this, but look how you're still hanging in there. Do you know how many moms would have given up? What a great mom you are to still be hanging in there. That can be very powerful. So find something she's doing right. And finally, show her she is a good mom. I want to tell you that a number of studies that have been done looking at universal motivators of moms, things that motivate them more than anything else. The number one motivator is the emotional feeling that a mother is making a decision that helps her feel like a good mother. So knowing that that is a trigger for her to feel that she's a good mom, you want to look for ways to show her that she's a good mom. So you might say something like, look how your baby is looking at you. He knows you're his mother. Statements like that are very, very powerful in helping that mom to feel she really is a good mom. So affirmation is powerful. And in step 3, as I mentioned, is your education. But keep in mind here, your education doesn't occur until after steps 1 and 2. So if you remember this little statement or this little saying, this little phrase, connection before content. Steps 1 and 2 are designed to build the connection. Step 3 is the education. And once you've built the connection, then her brain will be opened up so she can hear your information. So when you get ready for education, you need to remember that education is going to be more powerful when you move from just telling people things to actually engaging them. Now, there are times when you're going to need to just tell women what to do. So when that happens, use simple language, try to keep your statements short, and target your message to what's most important and most relevant to the mom and her situation. It's more powerful, however, when you can show her that information, especially when you can do that in a very visual way. So you see in this picture a lactation consultant is showing the mother how to hand express by using the express model so the mother can practice and follow along with her while she's showing her what she's talking about. So I think anytime you can use visuals, If your patient handouts can be full of big photographs that really show the teaching points rather than a whole lot of words, they're going to be a whole lot more powerful to the mom. Demonstrations can be really powerful, and using objects like belly balls and things to demonstrate stomach size, all those things can be much more powerful than just telling moms. But when you can move to engaging the moms, that is even more powerful. And what do I mean by that? By engaging, I simply mean that you help the mother take ownership of the plan. So you ask her things like, what do you think will work best? What are some things you feel you'd like to try? What do you think is going to be best for your family? And then let her know, we're going to face this problem or this difficulty you're encountering. We're going to face that, and we're going to face the solution to it together. We're going to work together. And that knowledge that she's not alone, that she has support from the hospital staff and from her postpartum network as well, can be very powerful in helping her feel that this is something I can take on for myself. And finally, I just want to remember the power of praise and to remind you that for many of the mothers we serve, they have never, and they will never, be told by anybody in their family or in their life that they're good moms. And you even think about your own life if you're a mother yourself. That's just not a message we hear very often from the people around us. So remember that power. I've had so many mothers tell me, I will never remember, I don't remember what that nurse told me, but I will never forget her face, and I'll never forget the way she made me feel. And when I look back on my breastfeeding experiences of my 5 children, I see faces of nurses and physicians whose names I will never remember, but I always have remembered the things that they said that made me feel that I was a good mom. So never miss that opportunity to show a mom that she is a good mother and that she feels powerful and empowered as a mom. And with that, I see our time is up, so I'm not going to close with a story I sometimes close with, but I'll turn it back over to Becky or Ingrid and see if there's any closing comments or questions or anything else we need to share.
That was wonderful, Kathy. This is Becky. I think I know we're right at the hour, and I don't know if what your schedule permits, if you have time for a few questions, if there are people that we can take a few minutes if people do have some questions
Sure.
that can stay on, that would be wonderful. So if y'all want to either mute yourself to ask a question, or you can type it in the chat box, and we can certainly try to address that. So any questions for Kathy? We haven't had anybody type anything. And Kathy, maybe go ahead and share your story, if and that might people are thinking since we
I'll go ahead and do that then. And this was a story of, I've had so many incredible stories and experiences, but this was one I will never forget. I went to the hospital to visit with a teen mother, and she actually was a member of my church at the time, and she had asked me to come up. She wanted to breastfeed. Her mother did not want her to breastfeed, thought that that was something only dogs should do. She was really opposed and very, very negative. Well, the girl called me after the baby was born. I had done a little class with her at the church, and after it was over, she told me, I really, really, really want to breastfeed. I kind of sensed she wanted to do it because her mother didn't want her to do it. It was kind of that situation. But I went to the hospital after the baby was born, and when she called me, she said, Miss Kathy, I had my baby yesterday at 10 o'clock last night. This was now 10 o'clock the next morning. It's been 12 hours. And she said, I haven't been able to get the baby to latch. The nurse came in and told me, if you don't get this baby to latch in 15 minutes, the baby's getting formula. So she was like, please rush up here as quick as you can. So I got up to the hospital and walked in, and she had a room full of visitors. There were 9 women from the church in that room, and they were all passing this baby around. And sitting on the edge of the bed was this teen mother with her legs folded, and she was just looking longingly at her baby, and it absolutely broke my heart. And as soon as I walked in the room, one of the women of the church said, "Oh, Kathy, you're here. Do you want to hold the baby?" And I said, "Oh, yes, I would love to hold the baby." So I wanted that baby out of their arms. So immediately they put the baby in my arms. And I then announced, "I'm actually here to help her with breastfeeding." And just like that, everybody ran screaming out of the room. They were like, "Oh, we don't want to see that. Oh, nobody wants to look at that." So they all went rushing out, including the grandmother. And I turned to the mother to give her her baby, and she said to me, "I've changed my mind. I don't want to breastfeed after all." And I have to confess, there was a big part of me, my heart just sort of sunk, and I thought, oh, I just think this would have been so good for this girl. It really would have helped her to feel empowered, and I hate that she's changed her mind. But you know, then I paused, and I kind of read between the lines and thought, what is this mother feeling? And at that point, I said to her, "You know what? Let's not even worry about breastfeeding, because you look like a mom who just needs to hold her baby." And she said, "Oh, Miss Kathy, I do." She said, "I really haven't gotten to hold her much." And I said, "Well, tell me how things went." So I'm putting the baby in her arms and asking her to share her story. And she said, "Well, after she was born, they actually took the baby to the nursery, and I didn't get to see her for about 3 hours, and then they brought the baby back to me, and she just hasn't latched. She's been sleeping the whole time, and I just can't get her to wake up, and nobody's helping me. I don't know what to do. I don't know what I'm doing." And I said, "Well, just, don't worry about that. Let's just hold the baby." And I said, "So did you get to hold your baby skin to skin after birth? Remember we talked about that?" And she said, "No, the hospital didn't let me do that." And I said, "Was the baby okay?" "Oh, yeah, the baby was fine. Had an ACR of 9, the first reading, and the baby was fine." And I said, "Well, since you missed that opportunity, how would you feel about holding your baby skin to skin?" And I know what y'all are thinking. I was thinking the same thing, of course. But I knew this girl wanted to be close to her baby. That's something she had shared with me that she really wanted in this experience of being a mom and a single teen mom. And she said, "Oh, Miss Kathy, I'd love to hold her like that. Can you show me how to do it?" And I said, "Sure." So we stripped the baby down. I put that baby on her chest in the skin, covered her up while all the visitors were out in the hall doing their thing. And you know what happened. This baby began to move toward her breast. She was a little bit stunned. She said, "What's going on? What's she doing?" And I said, "I don't know. Let's just watch and see what she wants to do." And certainly at a certain point, that baby latched on beautifully all by herself. And this little teen mom was so thrilled. When I left her, she was breastfeeding, doing well. The baby was transferring milk really well. And when I got home, she called me later that day and said, "Miss Kathy, I'm a breastfeeding advocate now. I want to do this. I want you to help me. I really want to continue breastfeeding." And about a week later, I had gone to church, and she had been home from the hospital for several days. And I looked up and saw her come in the side door of the church. And she didn't have the baby with her, which sort of stunned me. I thought, "Oh, my gosh, what's going on?" And after church, she ran to where I was and said, "I wanted to come over and see you really quickly." And I said, "Oh, is everything okay? Where's the baby's home? I fed her right before I left." She said, "I just had to come and bring you something." And what she brought me was a photograph that she had asked me to take of her while she was holding her baby skin to skin. This baby was gazing at her with the most incredible look of admiration, and she had asked me to take a picture of that. And so she actually put that picture in my hand, and she said, "I want you to have this. And you know why I wanted you to take that picture?" And I said, "Tell me." She said, "Because that is the moment when I fell in love with my baby, and when I think my baby fell in love with me, and I never wanted to forget that moment." And I just started crying when she shared that with me. And she told me, she said, "That was a turning point in my whole life, to feel that my baby really does love me." And this little girl went on and breastfed for well over a year. And at the time I first saw her, she wasn't even going to do it at all. She changed her mind. So I just want to remind you that I think it's so powerful what we do in the hospital, and so much of what we do isn't just the knowledge we bring and all that expertise and experience, but it's just taking the time to really hear a mother, to listen to her, to tune into what her feelings might be, and giving her what she needs to reach what's important to her, the goals that she feels are important to her. I've never forgotten that story, and it's been a guide for me over the years to remember how important how we talk to moms really is.
All right, Kathy, I'm glad we made time for that, definitely. So I haven't seen anything show up in the chat box. Anybody, we've still got most people on, so kind of last call if anyone has any questions for Kathy. I'm not hearing any, so. All right, well, we will wrap this up then, and just a reminder that, yeah, we'll have our next webinar in October. Stay tuned. And thank you so much, Kathy, for presenting today. It was really, really good.
Yeah, thanks so much. I enjoyed it.